The thing is, I don't really want to output like a null object for every single clone within this group. There's only 200 in this, which isn't, I could probably manage that still in After Effects, but it might, it's just going to be a bit of a slowdown. Obviously, the more layers we have, and if they've all got keys on every frame, it's going to take longer to generate that AEC file. It's going to take longer to open it into After Effects. It's going to take longer in the timeline, etc. So if we could just output the information for specific clones, that would be much more useful. In the actual job that I used this technique for, there were, I think, like 2,000 in one cloner and 4,000 in another. So there was like huge amount of objects, and there's no way that I'd want to have sat and waited for After Effects to deal with 6,000 null objects. It would have just been ridiculous. And the thing is as well with the AEC export from Cinema 4D is that it has a huge amount of information to kind of collate, and if you think that it has to output like the position and rotation values for every single object and every single frame, and each of those has got 3 values, when you've got thousands of objects, you're talking a huge amount of information that it has to collect, and it can mean that the AEC takes a long time to generate. It can take several minutes to generate, and sometimes you just want to pop back in and output the information for something really quickly. You might just want to come back and just grab this flare and just output the information for that. So what I do to get around that is very often I won't enable save in the render settings here. I'll render the file as a separate thing, and I'll come back in and I'll use this button at the bottom here, save project file, and you can use that to save the project file whenever you like. So if you update or you need to add some more objects, you just come back and use this button and re-output the AEC. And the other thing that I do is I very often delete loads of the objects out of my scene. I just get rid of that cloner. I don't need to have any of that information. I don't need to have like my scene with the sky, or I don't need the effectors maybe. Depending on what I'm doing, depending on what I need to output, I just delete anything that isn't necessarily needed in that calculation, and it tends to make that whole export process much quicker. So what I'd like to do here is rather than just selecting the cloner, coming to tags and adding an external compositing tag, which will output a null object for every single clone, I'm going to use a different technique. And what we're going to do first of all is we're going to link some lights to the positions of some of these iPods. Let's just come to a point in time where we're a little bit closer, like here. And it'd be really nice if we could have like a trail coming off of the back of these, maybe, that we add in After Effects using Particular. And of course, Particular will use lights as emitters, so it'd be a good way to do this would just be to simply link some lights to these positions on these objects. We can do that just by using a little bit of expresso to extract the position of individual clones, and then taking that and then linking it to objects within our scene. First of all, I'm going to add a null object. I'm going to call this emitter lights. And I'm going to hold down shift and just add a light, and let's just call this light emitter. And I'm going to uncheck diffuse and specular because I don't want this to actually contribute any light to the scene. I'm going to take my emitter lights, choose tags, Cinema 4D, expresso, and add an expresso tag to the null at the top. Let's just pull this up. In this expresso window, what we can do is we can use the MoGraph data node to extract the information about specific clones. So if we drag our cloner in first of all, because this is the object that we're interested in working with, and we output the object. Next we right click, choose motion graphics data, and we need to add in the MoGraph data node. So the object that we want to extract the information from is our cloner, so we link the object from the output of our cloner to the input of the data node. You can see here we have a value for index, and index is currently set to 0 here. Now the index is the number of the clone, so it starts at 0 and counts up to the total number of clones that we have in our setup. And then once we've got that, we can output the position or the rotation or lots of other different values that you can see in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to output the global matrix of our object, and that will give us position and rotation information all in one output. If we then take this emitter light, drag it into our expresso, and then add the input for global matrix, we can then link that global matrix output to the global matrix of that emitter. And there we go, and you can see immediately that this light has now jumped to this clone. So that's quite fortunate actually, that clone index number 0 is visible at this point on this frame. If we select our data node and we then click that to 1, you can see that it's jumped somewhere else. Now I'm not sure exactly where that is, it seems to be out of shot, but this little indicator is telling me it's down here, so it looks like it's this frame just down here. There you go, this clone just down here. And obviously if we keep going, it's going to jump to the next one and then the next one, and you can see as I click through the different indexes, that light jumps to the corresponding clone. Now I would like to let's just come to say frame 75 and select an object. Say this one here looks like an OK candidate. I would like to literally have these lights at the back corners of this object, so as it spins we get an interesting trail coming out from particular. So the easiest way to probably do that is just to put the lights into a null, link the null to the clone position, and then remove the lights so they're actually at the corners. So let's add in a null object. I'm just going to hold down Alt so that it becomes the parent of this light, and let's just call this O1. And I'm going to drag O1 to replace the emitter in this that emitter light. So now it's linking to that null object. We can then take this light and we can kind of drag it to the back of that object, and we can just drag it down. And obviously I can grab another one by control dragging to duplicate and pull this up. And if we just switch to a side view, and let's just frame that. Oop, bear with me while I zoom in my wonky mouse wheel. Okay, so here we go, and you can see that I mean that looks okay, to be honest. You know, maybe we just move them back a tiny bit so they're just off the back of it. But that gives you the idea. So now what we should be able to do is, as we move forward, you can see that that's following. Now I'm not sure if you noticed that there was a slight delay there, and the reason for that is because we need to make sure that this is evaluated after our cloner, and the cloner is a generator, so we need to give the priority to our generators. So if we select this expresso tag, and where the priority option is, we set that to generators and set this to say 401, and now there shouldn't be any lag at all. And you can see now that as I'll just come back a few frames. There we go. You can see now that these lights are indeed sticking to the back of that object. So that's the first part of the problem done. Now when we export our AEC file, we can export these lights and they'll come into After Effects, and we know that they're going to be in the right position for our object. The next part of the problem is, how do we decide which clones we want to use? Now of course we could just come into our expresso that we've set up here, and we have our data node and we have our O1. Let's just control drag these two nodes to create a duplicate, and if we link our cloner into here again, and we take this null and we duplicate this, call this O2 say, and we drag this into this second box, now we can actually, you know, click through these different index numbers and we can just move through until we find the clone that we want to work with. The problem with that is it's not exactly the best workflow, is it? I mean, it's okay in a scene such as this where you've only got 200 clones, but even then it's still a bit of a waste of time. You're going to click, you know, a maximum of 200 times for each one that you want to add until you find the specific clone that you want to add it to. It seems a bit long-winded. What we really want to do is be able to select these different clones, and from making a selection, work out what the index of that clone is. And that's exactly how we can do it. We can do it using the MoGraph selection tag. Now this trick that I'm about to show you was shown to me, or a scene file was given to me by a guy called Christian Wolf, and he deserves the credit for this little trick actually. It certainly wasn't something that I came up with, but it was really handy and I thought it'd be good to share, and he didn't mind sharing his trick with me, so I'm sure he won't mind me sharing it with you guys. Now the way that it works is we just simply add some user data to our null object first of all. So let's just choose add user data. I'm going to just pull this down, and we need to add in a few different things. So we need to add one called selection tag, and this is where we drag our MoGraph selection tag that we're working with, and so the data type for this is going to be a link. And we then also need to say which object we're going to work in with. You don't need to use these user data to do this. You can set this up all in XPresso. This just makes it a little bit more versatile and reusable in other scenes. So I'm going to call this cloner, or you could call this MoGraph object, because it will work with other things as well as cloners. Anything, you know, it would work with a matrix object, for instance. So here we have the cloner, and that's also a link. And then finally, we need to just add in a number value so that we can output the number of the clone that we're selecting. So I'm going to just add data, and let's call this index. And this is an integer because it's a whole number, and we don't want a limit on the minimum or maximum there. And we click OK. So now we have these three user data elements within our, or on our object. So if we select our cloner, come up to MoGraph and add or open up the MoGraph selection tool, you then get this red dot on all of your clones, and you can simply select an object and it creates a tag. So that means if we add an effector or something to this object, it's only going to affect that one selected clone. But we're going to use this slightly differently. We're going to use this to work out what the number of that clone is. So if we select our emitter lights, we drag our cloner into the cloner field, we drag our selection tag into the selection field. Next we need to open up this XPresso, and we need to drag our emitter lights into here, and we're going to output those user data items. So we're going to output the selection tag, and we're going to output the cloner. Now we've done that, we add in the MoGraph data node, link the cloner to the object. So it's basically taking the link that we've created here for this cloner object and linking it into that object field. So there's no reason that you couldn't just drag the cloner in and link the object like this. But as I say, doing it this way makes it a little bit more versatile, and you can reuse this setup and just copy and paste this null into your scene and just link in the appropriate tag and cloner object. So what we want to output from here is the number of clones. So we have an output for count, but we need to bear in mind that internally the count starts at 0. So if we have 100 clones in our count, the index will start at 0 and it will end up at 99. So we need to subtract 1 from the count for the number to make sense. So we go new node, XPresso, calculate, math, drag the count as the input, set the function to subtract, and just subtract 1. So now we have the total number of clones within our cloner, and what we want to do is we want to iterate all of those clones and see if it's selected or not. And if it is selected, we want to say, okay, which one is selected, and by doing that we can then find out which number it is. So we add in a new node, XPresso, iterator, iteration, and this will iterate through the number of elements that we specify. So we start at 0 and we end at the count value that we've just created. So we drag our link there. So we're going to iterate through all of our clones. Next we add in a new node, motion graphics MoGraph selection, because this is what we want to iterate through. The selection tag that we link in comes from this user data. So again, you could drag your selection tag in and link it in that way. And the index is the iteration. In other words, it's going to iterate through all of the index numbers of our cloner. We then want to say, okay, is it selected or not? If it is selected, then output the value of that selected item. So we can then output that value and we can store it in this field that we've created. So if we drag our emitter lights onto here, come down to user data and add that index. And what we want to do is we want to switch this on if that specific number is selected. So drag the selected onto here, onto the on port, and the index number needs to correspond to the same number that's being iterated. So in other words, as the iteration counts through, it goes into here, and if this selected, it will then switch that on for that one iteration. So now, if we select our emitter lights, you can see index 3. If we just lock this, select our cloner, select that MoGraph selection tag, you can see that this is number 3. If I now select this here, you can see that it changes. 0, 26, 199. So if we want to link one to here, we just link it to index 0. So we come back to our other XPresso setup, choose data, and we set the index to 0. When we come back here, there you go, you need to force a redraw, but there we go. And now you can see that those lights have indeed attached to that object. So now you can simply go through your scene, make a selection of all the different objects that you would like to link your nulls to. And as you do it, just duplicate these and adjust the index number to match. As an example of this, I've duplicated my null 5 times, and then I've got this set up 5 times, and you can see if we go through that this like null 01 is linked to number 12, null 02 to number 4, null 03 to number 6, 189 and 11, and you can see the different sets of nulls, etc. in the scene there. So basically we can then save our After Effects Exchange file, and we can output the position of these lights, and we can use that with particular. Now, as I said before, I really don't want to necessarily have to export that with my cloner, etc., with like thousands of objects, just because it takes like quite a bit of time. So what we could do is we could simply bake the positions of these, and then we can just get rid of the cloner because we don't need that in the XPresso anymore. Obviously, you wouldn't want to save that as a, as the next version of your scene in case you needed to come back to it, but this is just probably a quicker way of doing it than when you've got thousands and thousands of objects trying to export the AEC file, because I always find that the AEC file can be a little bit slow when you've got really heavy scenes. So I tend to export quite a few of them with a reduced number of objects in my scene, depending on what the specific task is at the time. So if you wanted to bake those nulls, first of all you can just select them all, switch to timeline, let's go to key mode. I'm going to just switch off automatic and show animated, so there's nothing in there now. If I drag these null objects into the timeline, we can select them all, and then we can come up and we can choose functions, bake objects. Before I do that, I'm just going to come up and save incremental, just in case something drastic goes wrong and I mess it up, so that I just have the scene file at this point. So if we come to functions, bake objects, okay, and I want to bake expressions, that's pretty important because the position of those is based on that XPresso setup. We can create a copy of them if we wish, but I don't want to do that, and I don't need any parameter. I just need position and rotation values. We need the rotation because obviously our lights are children of those nulls. If we just click OK, then it will go through and bake those, and hopefully at the end of this we should have a timeline full of keys, and there we go. And you can see now if we select these that we get the animation path. So we now have that information baked into our scene. So I'm going to save this once again. Of course, if we wanted to link them to something else, we'd have to just delete those keys and adjust the index in our XPresso. But for this, hopefully that's going to be fine. That should be enough information for you guys to be able to work with this. So now I've done that, I can come up and come to my render settings and save my compositing project file. Before I do that though, I'm simply just going to delete my cloner, just so that my scene is nice and light, and I'm going to delete these effectors. I don't need them anymore. So really all I've got in this scene, if we can delete this scene null as well. So I've really just got my camera and a few lights. I've still got all the same render settings, so the composite is still going to work because it's going to look for these particular frames and it's going to set up the composite for me. It's going to use my multipass separate lights settings, so I still need to leave these lights in there, but it should be really quick to do. So what we can do is we can come over and we can choose to save project file. Once you click the button, you then need to find the directory that you'd like to save it into, and you can see here is like a whole bunch of frames that I've already rendered, and I've already actually saved out an AEC file for this here, and you can see that at the bottom. But I'll just save this one anyway, because you can see how quick it does it, and there we go. So that's done. And if you're having problems with the AEC file, there's a few things that you can do to troubleshoot them before you need to start panicking. Obviously, the first thing is to make sure that you have the plugin installed in After Effects, and make sure that you only have one of those plugins installed as well. But you can actually look at the AEC file itself and analyze it internally, like look at what's going on in that document to see if it looks like it should be making sense or not. Because believe it or not, it's really just a text document that's read by a plugin, and the plugin interprets all that text and applies it to your After Effects project. So let's just save this out and switch over to the Finder and have a look at what that AEC file looks like. Alright, I've closed that down, but I just make a point that you don't want to save that file. Don't save that file when you quit Cinema 4D, because I've deleted the cloner out of it. So if we save over the if we save, then we will lose our project. So that, a bit risky there, but I always save incremental anyway. I hardly ever use save on its own. I just end up with like hundreds of versions, but I can go back to so many previous versions. It's just saved me so many times if things go wrong. So that's not saved that file. We've saved out the AEC, rendered the frames. Let's just close this down. Quit Cinema 4D. Here we go. Here's the render folder, and here we have the AEC files. And you can see it's 98K. But what you can do is you can simply open this into a text editor. So if I right click and choose open with BB Edit, for instance, or even text edit, it's not in the list there, is it? Okay, so I'm just going to open it into text edit by dragging it onto my dock down here. Oh, there we go. So open that into text edit, and here's the document that we've opened. And we can see if this is looking correct to, once you know what these are meant to look like, you can open it and you know whether it's sort of giving you the right result or not. If you haven't got information in there that you think should be in there, then something's not quite right. But you can see it's set up a Cinema 4 composition, the resolution, the number of frames, the frame range, frames per second, whether you've used fields or not. And then here we have where it sets up the compositions in After Effects for you. So it's going to set up these different comps in After Effects using these assets, and these are the assets that it's going to place in those comps. And then as we scroll further down, you can see that we have information about the camera, when it's going to put the frames, and these values here correspond to all the keys. So the position, point of interest, rotation, and then we've got the same for all of our lights. So as we scroll through, you can see we have all this information, which is basically keyframe data for our lights. All of this looks correct to me. There shouldn't be any reason why it doesn't work. These are non-animated lights, and you can see that it just puts the start and end key values. But it also has things like, the color, intensity, whether we have shadows, those kind of things. So it's pretty clever that it's all stored in a text document, and we can simply read that using the plugin. So once you have got to this point, obviously we need to jump over to After Effects, and we should be able to just open this up. And it will show us all the comps set up. It will import all of our light positions, and it will import all of our renders as well. And you can see here I've got blinking loads and loads of renders. So let's jump over to After Effects and bring this in and have a look at what we've got and see what we can do with it once we're in our comp program.